Let's continue on now with this revelation of the two witnesses. And you want to know the number one thing you see in these two witnesses? You see the work, the ministry, the death, the resurrection of the Lord himself in these two, as we're going to now see. These two are the coming of Elijah to the Jewish people. They're the work of Christ himself being fulfilled in them, that the Jewish people can see this. Because we saw these two will be prophesying, preaching, teaching in Israel for 3.5 years. The time from the Lord, when the Lord was baptized by John the Baptist, until his death and resurrection was 3.5 years. And they're going to be in Israel for 3.5 years prophesying. And we saw in Revelation 11:7, and when they have finished their testimony, once their testimony's done, once their work's done, once this work of Christ is fulfilled in and through them, as we're going to clearly see, once their testimony's done, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. And their bodies will lie in Jerusalem. And we saw in verse 9, and those from the peoples and tongues and tribes and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not permit their bodies to be laid in a tomb. And we saw also in verse 10, and those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and make merry, and they will send gifts to one another. So as we said, the church is getting the wrong interpretation, the wrong teaching, the wrong revelation about the end times. Because this is what's going on. Those on the broad road to destruction, they tell you the tribulation is 7 years of God pouring out his wrath upon mankind. But we saw in Revelation chapter 7, beginning in verse 9, that there are these people in Revelation 7:9. And after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne. And later that one of those 24 elders says to John, and one of the elders answered, saying to me, these who are clothed in white robes, who are they? This number that nobody can number. This number that nobody from every nation, tongue, tribe, and people. The elder asked John, who are they? And I said to him, my Lord, you know. And he said to me, these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Those that are teaching you and telling you that no Christians can be in the tribulation or go into the tribulation, they're blind, they're misled, they're misleading you. Because it says right here in Revelation chapter 7, beginning in verse 9, that from every nation, tongue, tribe, and people, there's a number of Christians in the tribulation that no one can number. It's too many to number, John said. So now we have in this first 3.5 years of the tribulation, to the Gentiles the latter-day rain is being poured out upon those that went into the tribulation and those that get saved in the tribulation. Like I've said many times, those that are ready, waiting, watching, they don't love the world and the things of the world, they'll be caught up in the pre-tribulation rapture. But those, Laodicea, that love the world, they're walking in the flesh, they'll go into the tribulation, but they'll have the latter-day rain poured out upon them as they get prepared for the marriage supper of the Lamb. And these two witnesses will be prophesying, teaching in Israel. They'll have the latter-day rain poured up on them. And this is the work of the life and the ministry of Christ that is in them. So all around the earth, when these two are killed, people are making merry. They're sending gifts. They're rejoicing all around the world, it says. Those on the broad road to destruction try to tell you that it's 7 years of God pouring out his wrath upon mankind. You have at least, they say, 21, 30, some say more, cosmic, weird, catastrophic disasters being poured out upon the earth. But look what it says there. Those around the earth, around the whole earth, and those who dwell on the earth will rejoice and make merry, and they will send gifts to one another. That's what's going on right at the middle of the tribulation, at the death of these two witnesses. So let's go on now. Revelation 11:11. The two witnesses have been killed. Their bodies have been lying in the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days. And the world is rejoicing over this. And verse 11. And after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet. See, this is like the work of Christ. They've been ministering in Israel, in Jerusalem, for 3.5 years. They've been slain. Their bodies, they've been dead for 3.5 days. All this is a type of the death, resurrection, life, ministry of Christ. And now, after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, just like Christ himself. He was in the grave for 3 days plus, and then he was resurrected. The breath of life, he rose again from the dead. And the same thing is happening with them. And after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet. And they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were beholding them. Or most translations say, and great fear fell upon them who saw them. It means who literally saw them. That word saw or beholding there, it means the ones that were visiting there. They were looking at them. They were staring at them. They were attending there. They were inspecting them. They were literally looking at them. So the people in Israel will see the breath of life come back up into them. And they'll see them stand on their feet. And great fear fell upon them who saw them and saw them rise back up again. So this great fear, and they saw it. One thing we got to understand, saints, is that throughout the church age, God has went to the Gentiles, and the Gentiles have been getting saved. Israel has been blinded, and if you read all of Romans 11, you'll see this where Paul's talking about Israel having this temporary blindness. There's still the remnant. There's still some Israelis that have gotten saved throughout the church age, but at large, God has went to the Gentiles, and Israel has been blinded. And in Romans 11:25, Paul says, "For I do not want you, brethren, to be uninformed of this mystery, lest you be wise in your own estimation, that a partial blindness has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, and thus all Israel will be saved." What Paul's saying here, I don't want you, brethren, to be uninformed of this mystery, that a partial blindness, some Israelis have been saved throughout the 2,000 years of the church age, but most of them as a nation, as a people, that a partial blindness, and if you read Romans 11, the whole chapter, you see that God has brought this upon them, and that partial blindness has happened to them until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, and thus all Israel will be saved. This is the middle of the tribulation. That's now the time of the Gentiles is over. The fullness of the Gentiles has come. The Gentile harvest has happened. First you had the first fruits harvest of those that are ready, waiting, watching. Before the tribulation, the first fruits were always taken into God before the harvest at large. And then the harvest of the Gentiles happens. I don't know if it's exactly when these two get caught up or if it happens a little sooner. But it said there, Paul said, that a partial blindness has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles. Now the time of the Gentiles is over. Now God's going to open through the preaching, teaching, prophesying, death, resurrection, and rapture of these two witnesses. God's going to open Israel's eyes. They're going to have their eyes open. And that's what you read right there. After the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were beholding them, or who saw them. That saw means they saw it. That's where Israel will have her eyes open. She's now going to be healed of that blindness. God's going to open her eyes right here at the middle of the tribulation through the preaching, teaching, prophesying, death, resurrection, and rapture of these two witnesses. Because look at verse 12. And I heard a loud voice. Once they have the life, the breath of God come back into them, and they rise up on their feet, and all those in Israel that are beholding them, great fear comes upon them. Verse 12, and they, the two witnesses, heard a loud voice from heaven, saying to them, come up here. And they went up into heaven in the cloud, and their enemies beheld them. So these around the world, who through the internet that's still running, through satellite TV that's still running, that have been sending gifts and making merry and rejoicing around the world, they're going to behold them come back to life and be caught up into heaven. So many Christians want to tell me, oh, there's no mid-tribulation rapture. There's only ever one rapture. Enoch walked with God, and then he was not. God took him. He was raptured. Elijah was raptured. Paul was caught up into heaven. John, during this, was caught up into heaven. The Lord ascended into heaven. The two witnesses are going to be raptured right here. Don't be silly and send me emails and say there's no mid-tribulation rapture. Right here is at least the two witnesses. And all those Christians from Revelation chapter 7, that number that no one could number, where did they go? Because they're not mentioned again after this. They have to have been raptured at the middle of the tribulation. And as we're going to see, now Israel has that blindness healed. Right there from verse 11. And great fear fell upon those who saw them rise up from the dead. Their eyes are going to be opened. They're going to see. And they're going to turn to Christ. Turn to Yeshua the Messiah. And we see in verse 12 there, and they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. These two are now raptured. Look at the work, the fullness of Christ in these two. They're prophesying, they're teaching in Israel for 3.5 years like the Lord did after his baptism with John the Baptist. They're killed in Jerusalem like the Lord was. They're dead for 3 days like the Lord was. Then the breath of life comes into them like the Lord. And then the Lord ascended into heaven. These two are called, they're caught up into heaven. It's the perfect work of the work and the life of Christ, the life, death, the resurrection of rapture, the catching up of Christ in these two. Do you see that? And they went up into heaven in the cloud, and their enemies beheld them. And now verse 13. And in that hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. So after these two are caught up, there's this great earthquake in Jerusalem, and 1/10 of the city of Jerusalem will fall, and 7,000 people were killed. Now 7's the number of fulfillment, completion. So this may be an actual to the 7,000, or it's just showing the number of the people that were killed in Israel. And 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake. So this we see too. These two, like the Lord, have been resurrected. And they're caught up into heaven. And we have this great earthquake. What do we see in Matthew chapter 28? First, let's look at verses 1 and 2. The Lord has been crucified. He's been laid in the tomb. And in Matthew 28:1, now after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave where the Lord was. And behold, a severe earthquake had occurred. For an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. So both Marys have come down to the tomb. And there's this great earthquake. And then in verse 6, Matthew 28:6, this angel that's there says, he is not here, for he has risen. These two have just risen. He is not here, for he has risen. Just as he said, come see the place where he was lying. See, the same thing's going on here in Jerusalem again. This work, this type, this perfect picture of the work of the Lord. The life of the Lord, the death of the Lord, the resurrection of the Lord being caught up into heaven. And after 3.5 days, the breath of life of God came into them. And they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon them who saw them. And now they have their eyes opened. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying, come up here. They're caught up. Like that angel said to Mary, he's not here, for he has risen. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. And they went up into heaven in the cloud, and their enemies beheld them. And in that hour there was a great earthquake. We just read that in Matthew 28, verse 2. And behold, a severe earthquake had occurred. And 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake. And now look at here. And the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The rest of who? The rest of the Israelis, not the rest of the world. The church, the Gentile church, has now been caught up in the mid-tribulation rapture. Because these two witnesses had the same latter-day rain poured out upon them. And they've been caught up. And now the Gentile church that went into the tribulation, and those that get saved in the tribulation, they've been caught up. Because they're not mentioned again. And in verse 13 again, and the rest of the Israelis, the rest of the Jews, were terrified. Not the rest of the world, not the rest of those that are following the kingdom of the beast and the Antichrist. No, this is the time of the Gentiles is now fulfilled. It's the fullness of the Gentiles. They've been caught up through the preaching, teaching, death, resurrection, and rapture of these two witnesses. Israel now has her eyes open. She's been partially blinded throughout this 2,000 years of the church age. And the rest of the Israelis who saw this, they have their eyes open, were terrified, and they gave glory to God. This is now the Israeli people having that partial blindness taken away. Their eyes are healed. They see the work of Yeshua the Messiah through these two witnesses. And then we see in verse 15, right after that, because remember we said the trumpets are messages to God's people about the tribulation, to get prepared, to get ready for war, to come together as one, to get ready for their wedding. And then look at verse 15, after the death, resurrection, and rapture of these two witnesses. Israel's eyes are open. They now turn to Yeshua the Messiah. And the rest of them, Israel now as a people, turn to Yeshua the Messiah. And what do we see right after that in verse 15? And the seventh angel sounded. And there arose loud voices in heaven, saying, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he will reign forever and ever. It's the seventh trumpet. Why is the seventh trumpet blown right here? Because now the Gentiles are gone. Through the preaching, teaching, death, resurrection, and rapture of the two witnesses, Israel's blindness is taken away. Her eyes are open. She receives Yeshua the Messiah. She's born again. That's it. That's why the seventh trumpet. It's the completion, the perfection, the fulfillment of the trumpets, of the messages about the tribulation to God's people. Because now the Gentiles' church is gone. And the Israelis have now turned to Yeshua, their Messiah. They're now going to reject the kingdom of the beast and the Antichrist. Now it's completed. The message is complete of the 7 trumpets. Israel has now received Christ. Her eyes have been opened. She's been born again. She's now the church in Israel. We now have the church in Israel. So we see this preaching, teaching, prophesying, death, resurrection, and rapture of these 2 witnesses is a perfect work and type and fullness of the life and ministry, death, resurrection, and Christ being caught up into heaven. It's seen in these 2 witnesses, and it's them preaching, teaching to Israel, and through their work, Israel has her eyes open. She sees that Yeshua was the Messiah. She receives him. And that's why it says in verse 14, the second woe is past. Behold, the third woe is coming. Remember, woes have to do with Satan. Because now Satan is coming. The Antichrist is coming. He's coming against them. The Gentiles have, the apostles were the Christ was the chief cornerstone of the church. The apostles were the foundation. The Gentiles throughout 2,000 years have been building up that temple, living temple of the living God. And now the Jews have their eyes open. They receive Christ as their Messiah. They turn to him. And now they're going to become the cap, the roof, the top, the crowning glory of the temple of the living God, through the preaching, teaching, death, resurrection, and rapture of these 2 witnesses. And this is the revelation of the 2 witnesses.